It may just be random events with random numbers that yield, based on their structure, certain outputs. And we may be the output of those random qualities.
I can't see any evidence of design directly, but I can extrapolate from that there must be some kind of intelligence behind the universe.
He's a staunch atheist, scientific atheist materialist, but he ends up concluding that fine-tuning points to some kind of a fine-tuner. And he's quoted as saying that the best data we have suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics and chemistry in order to make life possible.
Infinity times infinity equals infinity. Infinity to the infinity power equals infinity. We've got to stop using the multiverse.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. In this video, what we're going to do is follow a train of thought from a recent conversation between Alex O'Connor and Brian Greene into a conversation between Stephen Meyer and Joe Rogan, into a conversation between myself and Dr. Hugh Ross. The topic at hand that will connect these three pieces together is the fine-tuning of the universe and whether it is better explained by the multiverse theory or by intelligent design. I'm going to let each viewpoint speak for itself so that you all can assess where the chips land by the end of this video. Let's get into it.
The physicists can't go beyond the physical, but we can extrapolate explanations from the physical data, right? Like in the same way that if I were to look at some evidence around me, if we all left this room and somebody came in and saw that there were some glasses on the table and saw that there was a book placed kind of in the middle of the table and all this kind of stuff, they didn't see any human beings, they didn't see any agents, but they can just extrapolate from the arrangement of the descriptions that they see of the way the room is. There must have been somebody there. In the same way, the physicists might not be able to sort of look beyond the material, but can they look at the strength of the strong and weak nuclear forces and the fact that if gravity was a tiny little bit stronger, the universe would have collapsed in on itself, and a bit weaker and everything would have flown apart, and think, I can't see any evidence of design directly, but I can extrapolate from that there must be some kind of intelligence behind the universe.
I love this because Alex is basically poking at this idea that as the amount of information that we have about how finely tuned the universe is increases, it also increases the likelihood that there is actually a causal agent responsible for it, that it's actually legitimate to infer from an effect back to a cause if that effect is precise enough to warrant a cause that would require some intelligent agent.
Yeah, so bear in mind, number one, often people do say that if you change the value of the physical parameters just a little bit, the universe as we know it goes away. The problem with that is we can only do that analysis if you change the parameters by a little bit. If you allow the parameters to change by a lot of bit, not a little bit, and you allow many of the parameters to change simultaneously, nobody can really say what that cosmos would be like. And so it's possible that there are patches in parameter space where you would get different kinds of universes that perhaps would give rise to different living systems. And then each living system in its universe looks around and says, wow, this universe is so special. It must be that there's some kind of, grand design that got us here. But they're all saying that in their own parameter space because they're all making this mistake of only looking in a small neighborhood around the point in parameter space where they exist. So that's point number one. And so part of it is we just don't really know enough to make...
If we turned up gravity a little bit...
And left everything else the same, I agree.
But if we turned it up to 11, that somehow...
Right.
That might...
Yeah, but what if you simultaneously turn up the repulsive force that might come from a universe with charged... it's a highly complex problem.
Notice that he's not actually pointing to any evidence or any actual mathematical theorem. He's literally just speculating and saying, what if there is something out there in a galaxy far, far away, some other equation, some different combination of variables that could produce life? But it's just that. It is a what if and nothing more. So I just wanted to note that. Now I'm going to scrub forward a little bit here to where Alex circles back to the multiverse question as it relates to fine tuning, and they kind of continue this thread. So let's watch this now.
This multiverse situation that we were talking about before, do we have good reason to think that it might be the case outside of A, its possibility, and B, the way that it kind of conveniently does away with the trouble of things like fine tuning or the the trillions of ways that string theory dimensions could be folded in on themselves. Because like you imagined walking into a jacket shop and finding one that was perfect, and I'm imagining walking into a jacket shop and it's just like a tiny little store, you know, somewhere in New York on like the second floor, right? And it just has a few jackets and a few pairs of trousers, and I try on this jacket and it is like perfect. I mean, it's the exact shade of blue that I was looking for. I send it to my camera guy and he does the little hex code and he's like, man, this is like exactly the right color temperature. The sleeves are the perfect length, like uncannily perfect. Like everything is great. It's even got like a name tag from the previous owner that says Alex on it, just by pure and I think, man, this is absolutely unbelievable. I'm saying to my friend, this is unbelievable. I can't believe every single time I look at it, something new that just unfathomably coincidental. And the friend says, okay, this is amazing. What must have happened is that there are actually like an infinite number of jackets that are sort of sat in the back. And every time somebody comes into the shop, they sort of bring one out by chance and hope that it's a match. And I suppose we must also have sort of existed in New York for an infinite amount of time so that this guarantees that at least once this goes right. And of course, you're going to be the one that gets it right, because otherwise you wouldn't be having this amazing experience. Compared to just what I naively experience, which is like one room and a jacket which fits perfectly, I would basically ask that friend to give me more reason outside of the convenience of explaining this coincidence to believe in that infinite set of jackets, to think that it's actually true.
I love this question. Is there more reason outside of the convenience of explaining the coincidence to believe in the multiverse? And I want to know, listen to the answer that comes here and tell me if you think that question gets answered, or if there's some sort of a word salad that deals with something that is post Big Bang that doesn't actually address the multiverse hypothesis, which is pre-Big Bang. Tell me if you guys are kind of seeing what I'm seeing here in terms of a total non-answer to this great question given by Alex. Let's check it out.
In the end of the day, that's really what we do. We try to explain the confluence of data that seems to lock together with such a gratifying and impressive cohesion, just like your perfect jacket, you know, inscribed in just the right way. And
this is that jacket.
It's beautiful. I agree with your cameraman. And so what we try to do is to write down equations that will give us some insight into how it could be that there's a process that starts in the Big Bang and results in the things that we are now experiencing. Now, are there certain things that might be pure coincidence? Like, could it be pure coincidence that the gravitational constant and the electromagnetic force have just the right values to yield the qualities that allow us to exist? It could be coincidental. It could be really causative. It could have been, had the values been different, they would have caused something else. And that something else, if it had consciousness, might be in the same quandary, saying, why were the constants just the right value to allow me to exist? And yet they'd be different than the constants that we have. And so you have to be careful about seeing things and being impressed at their uniqueness when they might not be unique, and impressed at how they are designed when they may not be designed. They simply may be what they are, and you are the result of those features. They weren't set in order to get you to exist. They were set maybe by some random process, and you are the output of that random process. What we do as conscious beings, we tend to look at our environment and try to explain it in terms that somehow give us a narrative, a story. And we love stories that somehow have a purpose. But these stories may not have a purpose. It may just be random events with random numbers that yield, based on their structure, certain outputs. And we may be the output of those random qualities.
Now, you might be thinking that something about that conclusion that he provides at the end is just a little bit too convenient. I will refrain on giving any additional commentary until the end of this video, but I will now play a clip from Stephen Meyer on Joe Rogan addressing this same question of fine-tuning and the multiverse, and he's going to scratch beneath the surface a little bit and explain some of what is problematic about this line of reasoning. So let's get into that.
Terrence kind of had a very funny thing that he said about science. He said, science wants you to believe that it's all about measurement and reason if you allow them one miracle.
You guys know that I'm always trying to understand issues from different sides, not just my own. And so for that reason, I like a tool called Ground News. Here's how it works. Decline of Christianity in the U.S. has slowed and may have leveled off, Pew study says. And if we check this out, you can see total news sources, 95, left-leaning 26, right-leaning 24, center 20. So this is actually very centrist. You can see the bias distribution. You can actually look up the specific sources where they came from, where they fall kind of on the spectrum. And then you can scroll down here and compare headlines as well. Is Christianity making a comeback? Catholics are rapidly losing ground. Christianity makes a comeback. It's a really great way to just quickly assess narratives across the spectrum. Also, Ground News is running a really great deal right now, a discount. Go to ground.news/DDW to get 40% off their Vantage plan. That's the one that I use. Or you could just scan this code right here to unlock that very same deal. It's Ground News, folks. Now back to the video.
That one miracle's the Big Bang.
Yes.
That all things come from the most preposterous idea ever.
Yeah.
That everything came from nothing in one big miracle.
That's right. I completely
I totally
agree.
paraphrased it. He probably said it far more eloquently.
Well, this was for Fred Hoyle's objection to the Big Bang. He said he was a Democritean. He didn't believe. He said nothing comes from nothing, and I simply refuse to believe that the physical universe came from nothing physical. And moreover, he said it smacks of the Genesis account, which he detested, and so he rejected the Big Bang and formulated this steady state model.
By the way, really quick, that steady state model that he's talking about is the idea of a past eternal universe, which modern science has basically now totally debunked. Just context.
That was later, I think, decisively refuted by the discovery of the cosmic background radiation. It happens. I've had funny coincidental meetings with Hoyle, Herman Bondi, and Thomas Gold, all three of the architects of the steady state model. I met Bondi and Hoyle when I was a PhD student in Cambridge. And Hoyle held on to his dying day for the steady state. But Bondi, actually, we had a conversation about it, and he said that it turned out that it was a brilliant idea. It was a beautiful idea, just that it turned out that everything about it was wrong, and he rejected it. So, but later, Hoyle had his own conversion to a kind of quasi-theistic worldview because of his discovery of the fine-tuning parameters. But the point is that the materialists did not expect to have this evidence from the beginning. Hoyle thought that the laws of physics were the first law of conservation of matter and energy. Matter and energy are neither created nor destroyed except at the Big Bang. And he didn't like that, but eventually I think the physics community came around. There were so many indicators of that beginning event.
Now, again, as we're discussing detection methods and our ability to understand things is so radically different from 1920, 100 years ago. What is it going to be like 100 years from now? Are we making assumptions based on very limited data? It's a lot of data question for us, but it seems fairly limited given the scope of not just this universe, but then the concept of multiverses. Like, what are your thoughts of this concept of multiple universes?
I love to talk about the multiverse.
Or infinite universes.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised it. And this also connects to the Fred Hoyle story, which is fascinating. Again, with the proviso, science is necessarily provisional, and we always have to be open to new data.
Right.
But the trend lines, I think, are the things that are really interesting. So there's this Hoyle's. Let's start with Hoyle, and then we'll get to multiverse. Okay. So Hoyle is great astrophysicist. He's thinking about carbon, and he realizes that carbon has this unique property of being able to make long chain-like molecules, and long chain-like molecules therefore are capable of storing information, and we need information to build specified structures, in particular living systems. So he's trying to explain the abundance of carbon in the universe, and he thinks of 4 or 5 different ways that won't work, and finally he comes up with a way that would work. And long story short, it turns out for that way of building carbon chemically to work, it has to do with combining simpler what are called nucleons, smaller atoms to get the carbon molecule. There has to be a special resonance level for the carbon molecule, special way it sings. It has a certain energy level that causes it to sing at a certain frequency. Turns out the frequency he predicts, which would be necessary to explain the origin of carbon in the universe, exists within a particular form of carbon. And they determined this at Caltech. But then that turns out to be the tip of a deeper iceberg of a whole series of other things in the universe that would have to be just right to make this formation of carbon possible. The gravitational force would have to, inside stars, the gravity couldn't be too strong, too weak. The electromagnetic force couldn't be too strong or too weak. The ratio between them couldn't be too strong or too weak. Everything fell in this sweet spot, this kind of Goldilocks zone where, and we now call this the phenomenon of fine-tuning, that there are multiple parameters in the universe that fall within these very narrow tolerances, outside of which not only life would be impossible, but stable galaxies and even basic chemistry would be impossible. And so that is to say, even to get the evolutionary process going, you would have to have all these beautifully finely tuned parameters in place. And so Hoyle starts having a rethink about this, and he's a staunch atheist, scientific atheist materialist, but he ends up concluding that fine-tuning points to some kind of a fine-tuner. And he's quoted as saying that the best data we have suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics and chemistry in order to make life possible. And so he moves to this sort of rudimentary theistic position in his philosophy or his worldview. Now, a lot of other physicists have come to the same conclusion. Sir John Polkinghorne, great Cambridge physicist, had a late-in-life conversion, religious conversion, that was partially predicated on his awareness as a physicist of the evidence for the universe as a setup job, the Goldilocks universe, as some physicists have called it. So that's kind of, as Hoyle said, a kind of common sense interpretation. When we see other systems that are finely tuned, like a French recipe or an internal combustion engine, what we mean by fine-tuning is an ensemble of improbable parameters that work together to accomplish some remarkable outcome or functional or remarkable outcome. That's what, if you see an internal combustion engine, you think it was engineered because it's finely tuned. So common sense. The contrary argument to that, the main one, there have been others, but not even most secular physicists regard them as compelling anymore. The main contrary argument has been the idea of the multiverse. That, yes, our universe has this array of jointly improbable parameters that are in that sweet spot, but we just happen to be the lucky one because there's a gabillion other universes out there, and with different combinations of the laws and constants of physics and different initial conditions at the beginning of those universes. So all those things that were just right in our universe are, yes, extremely improbable, but there's so many other universes that the probability of a universe with that set of life-friendly conditions arising somewhere had to arise somewhere, inevitably, and we just happen to be in that lucky universe. And then we are stunned by that, and they call that this observer selection effect. So that's superficially an equally plausible explanation to the fine-tuner argument.
Now, finally, like I said, just a few days ago, I was talking with Dr. Hugh Ross, who I think has a great analogy, a great way of explaining what else is problematic about the multiverse. And so here's what that sounds like. What's the alternative to someone wanted us to be here?
Well, they would say it's just by pure chance. I mean, we just happen to have the physics play out in a lucky way that we can exist here. Some have appealed to the multiverse, saying, what if there's an infinite number of universes? In fact, when I wrote The Fingerprint of God in 1989, I was already telling audiences, the evidence for fine-tuning that implies the God of the Bible is exponentially increasing. The evidence literally gets stronger with every month that goes by. Eventually, the evidence will be so potent that atheists will have nowhere else to go but to hypothesize there's an infinite number of universes that are all different from one another, and we happen to live in the one lucky universe where everything is just right. And by year 2000, that's exactly what happened. Atheists were saying, There's a multiverse, infinite number of universes. But I find it interesting that an agnostic astrophysicist, Leonard Susskind, has basically told his peers, we've got to stop using the multiverse. It explains everything. An argument that explains everything explains nothing. And what I've done in The Creator and the Cosmos, the 4th edition, is to give you an example of that. And the whole point is lay people need to understand, infinity times infinity equals infinity. Infinity to the infinity power equals infinity. So if you're going to appeal to a multiverse, that would mean you could have an infinite number of planets, just like planet Earth. And on those infinite number of planet Earths, you could have an infinite variety of birch tree species. And what do birch trees do? They peel thin white pieces of bark. Well, if you've got an infinite variety of birch tree species, one of those species will peel thin white pieces of bark that are perfectly rectangular and measure 8.5 by 11 inches. And these pieces of birch bark will fall on soils with random chemicals in them that will make imprints on these pieces of birch bark that will duplicate all the photographs, tables, equations, and paragraphs in every scientific research paper that's ever been written. So those millions of scientific research papers, it's not scientists that wrote them, the multiverse did it. So that's an example of how you fall into a philosophical, refutable trap if you appeal to a multiverse. The best argument is a personal being actually designed it so we could live and thrive here.
We don't have evidence for a multiverse in the way that people would want evidence of God. Atheists want to see some physical manifestation of God, and they also don't have that for the multiverse. Rather, what you do is you look at what we can observe, and then you make inferences based on that. So I love the example that he gave of a combustible engine. I love the example that he gave of a well-made recipe. You look at the recipe and you infer that there might be a cook that played a role somewhere in this extremely well-designed recipe. You look at a combustible engine, you think there was probably an engineer. You look at a painting like like the Mona Lisa, and you think, I wonder if there was a painter's handiwork somewhere along the way. You look at the complexity of a computer system and you think maybe there was a designer behind this as well. You look at this universe and its complexity and you realize that due to that fine-tuning effect, perhaps, just perhaps, that there was actually design that went into this for the same reasons. Or you say, well, wait a second, like he already kind of explained, I don't need to rehash it, but maybe we just feel like it's special, but really it's just a numbers game and we're lucky in the multiverse. Both, however, require faith. Neither of those scenarios meets the level of the criteria of evidence that atheists want God to be able to bring to the table. Neither can the multiverse theory bring that to the table. So we're left in a place of faith at this juncture. But again, in the scenario of there being an intelligent designer, we also have a bedrock for ethics, for human rights, for human dignity, for the fact that we actually have things like love that exist, things like thoughts that exist that are immaterial. All of these other things begin to make more sense in the context of there being an intelligent designer, i.e. God. What's inconvenient about that is that then you also have this idea of an authority. If there's a personal intelligence above us and who has created the universe, then we're on the hook in terms of him being an authority. This is where C.S. Lewis talks about we desire a heavenly grandfather, not a heavenly father. We want someone that gives us presents and scratches our back and gives us all the things that we like, but never asks anything of us and does not ask us to be under their authority in any way. And I really think that that is the rub, and the reason that the multiverse theory is more appealing is people, when their hearts are hard against God, simply cannot stand the idea of his authority, because that means that they're not God.
If you like these kind of videos but aren't subscribed, help us reach that 1 million milestone. It also helps other people see this type of content in the future. I'll leave a link in the description where you can watch a documentary that I made. It's got Nabil Qureshi, Lee Strobel, William Lane Craig, and a bunch of other people in there that answer a lot of the questions that I've had about God over the years. I think you'll really like it, and it's totally free.